Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 24th hour of OWASP Chapters All Day. And this one's hosted by OWASP London. Sam, take it away.
Okay, everyone, welcome to OWASP London. My name is Sam Stepanian. I'm one of the OWASP London chapter leaders. We have three chapter leaders in OWASP, myself, Andra Letzer, and Sharif Mansour. And before we begin, I would like to thank everyone for watching. I hope you've been enjoying this event. And absolutely amazing what the organizers managed to put together. 24 chapters in 24 hours. I think this is absolutely great. And don't forget that we are all volunteers, and we are the last chapter to present. Yeah, I think it's been absolutely amazing, and you are all enjoying this. So a little bit about OWASP London. OWASP London is probably one of the older OWASP chapters. We actually been formed in 2004, and OWASP London was started by Dan Cuthbert, Dennis Cruz, and Ivan Ristich. The first chapter meeting was in October 2004 with just 10 attendees, and today OWASP London has over 1,000 members across our meetup groups and mailing lists. We run bi-monthly chapter meetings with 200 attendees now. I think we reached 300 meeting attendees in 2019. And finding bigger venues for our events is getting more and more difficult. And we hope that once the coronavirus crisis is over, we will be back welcoming you for real meetups or real events. Another interesting fact about OWASP London is that we started recording and live streaming our chapter meetings since 2016. Which helped us to build quite a big community. So very quick about the agenda. So after this quick introduction, I will be speaking about the OWASP Netaka project. And the last talk from OWASP London will be Grat Ongus talking about gamification of threat modeling. Moving back, speaking about OWASP London, we were actually very happy and very lucky to host one of the largest application security conferences in 2018, which was AppSec Europe. That took place in Queen Elizabeth II Centre in London. And obviously, people who live in London know that this conference centre is located right across the road from Westminster Abbey, which is probably one of the most known tourist landmarks in London. And it was absolutely fantastic seeing WASP flags flying right next to Westminster Abbey, which is such an iconic venue. The event itself was absolutely great. We had, I think, almost 800 attendees from all over the world attending, and this has been a highlight of OWASP London's activity over the past few years. So why OWASP London? If you are based in London, I invite you all to come and join our community once we're back in real life. Come and join our meetups. We're planning to run a few virtual ones this year because we have some great talks, great speakers. We also have a great community which has been gathering every couple of months. And yeah, I think you will gain a lot and learn a lot by joining our community. We also run Capture the Flag events, which I think one of the interesting things to mention. Obviously, just before me, you heard Andrea speaking about Secure Flag, which is one of the tools that we use to run Capture the Flag events, which are absolutely fantastic. All our Capture the Flag events are usually in person. Again, we're looking forward to the times when coronavirus is gone, so we can actually run these events in person. And the main reason why we run them in person, because we give away real prizes. So if you'd like to keep in touch with us on the chapter, you can do it on our webpage. We're on all social media, on Twitter, on Facebook, on our Slack, on Meetup. We have a YouTube channel where you can find all the recordings of all the talks from previous events, and we're also on LinkedIn. So this is about chapter. Now I'm going to move on to my talk, which is all about OWASP NetTacker project. What is OWASP NetTacker and why we are presenting this? Again, first, very briefly about me. As you already know, I'm OWASP London chapter leader. I come from a software development background, so I'm a developer myself. Currently, I'm working as an application security consultant in financial services industry here in London. So I am a defender. So why am I presenting a talk about a tool which consists of words network and attacker? So a bit of history. Back in 2018, Dr. Greg Frakos and myself, we were asked to demo OWASP NetTacker at Black Hat Europe conference because the original NetTacker project leaders could not get to London in time. And in the OWASP volunteer spirit, we said, okay, no problem, we will come and stand in for you, or we'll present the project. And what we had to do, we had to learn NetTacker overnight to be able to demo it at Black Hat Arsenal. And then suddenly this happened. We had a huge crowd of people gathering around our stand, all fascinated about this tool. And then we said, okay, that's fine. If so many people are interested, let's see if we can actually present it again. And in 2019, the same situation happened. We had probably even bigger crowd of people gathering to watch the demo. So this tool has been very, very, very popular, as you can see at the Hacker Conference. And why is that? And what is OWASP NetTacker? So first of all, OWASP NetTacker is an open source software tool, just like all OWASP projects. But what it does, it assists with the penetration testing, and it can also be used for bug bounty hunting. It can also be used in your enterprise for finding vulnerabilities because it automates information gathering and vulnerability scanning tasks. This tool is written in Python, so it can run on Windows, Linux, or Mac OS. And another very important thing to mention about NetTacker is that it's actually been enhanced by students in Google Summer of Code. For those of you who don't know what Google Summer of Code is, this is an initiative that Google puts every single year. And that is for students, for full-time students who are spending the summer break working on an open source project. And OWASP participates in Google Summer of Code every year, and many projects participate, and we benefit from students learning about OWASP, learning about our projects, but also, of course, helping us improve and enhance it. And I'm happy to say that OWASP NetTacker is one of such projects, and we currently have students working on it this summer, and we had students working on it since 2018. This is why I think it's quite important thing to mention that it's not just professionals working on these tools, it's not just pen testers, we have students. So I would like you to think of OWASP NetTacker as a Swiss Army knife. So what is a Swiss Army knife? It's a tool consisting of many tools. They're not necessarily compatible with each other, but can they all be used together? So OWASP NetTacker is a collection of tools or a collection of modules. It has modular structure. What it allows you to add your own modules in Python quite easily. It's also quite fast. It's using Python multi-threading, and it has customizable profiles, which are basically bundles of modules focused on a specific task. So imagine if you pull several tools out of your Swiss Army knife to do a particular task and actually to do it better. And the biggest advantage of OWASP NetTacker is that you can automate it and you can run it from a command line. So a few other notes about NetTacker. So it is not officially released yet. It's not even in beta. It's an incubator project at OWASP. The current version number is 001, so it's a very, very young project. We are looking for more contributors, so if you are a Python developer, we would like to invite you to come and help us. Yeah, it is an awesome tool because it already has a command line interface, it has a web UI, it has an API, it has a report generator. For those of you who use a Maltego tool, has Maltego Transform, and currently we have 62 modules, and the number of modules is increasing every single day. This is the OWASP project page for NetTacker, so you can find it on our owasp.org. And very important thing also to say that for documentation, you will need to go to OWASP wiki site. A lot of people just trying to, first thing is just to launch the tool, and they usually struggling to figure out how to use it. So I think it's very important that once you go to the GitHub page, you click on the wiki tab, and as you can see here, all the documentation is here where you can find out how to install it, all these requirements, and also some usage scenarios. So first of all, installing NetTacker is very, very simple. It's on GitHub. So to install it, you can just basically clone it from GitHub and install all the requirements, and then install the tool. It runs very well on Kali Linux. I'll try to do a live demo on Kali later on during this talk. And before we proceed, and before I can actually do any demo as well, I would like to remind everyone about the responsible use, because of course this is an offensive cybersecurity tool, and you shall not misuse this tool nor any other security tool for unauthorized access to other people's networks. And performing security scans without permission from the owner of the computer system is illegal. So first time I ran NetTacker, I found this screen, which is basically a whole bunch of module names. And obviously, I couldn't understand anything. What is it? How does it work? So what I've done in this talk, I'll try to organize it a little bit better so you can understand the tool a little bit better. So first of all, NetTacker has 3 types of modules. It has a module of type scan. For example, port scan is one of the scanning modules. Then it has module types of vuln or vulnerability scanning. So for example, Apache Struts vuln is the module which will scan and try to find an Apache Struts vulnerability. And it also has a module type of brute. And so that is used for brute forcing. And for example, SSH brute is one of the modules which is used for brute forcing. So NetTacker currently has 21 scan modules. You can find them all here on the screen. You can see there's some interesting ones like CMS detection scan, directory scan, port scan is one of the main modules. You can see we also have a few modules around Joomla and WordPress scans as well as a Wapalizer and a few others. We are adding new modules all the time, so hopefully there will be more modules next time you check out this tool. This is the list of all the vulnerability finding modules. We currently have 30 of them. Again, you can see it's quite a big and impressive list of various vulnerabilities. I'd like to bring your attention to some interesting ones. For example, the Citrix CV 2019-19781 is the recent vulnerability, which affected a lot of organizations around the world. And so we were able to add this module quite quickly to help many organizations to scan their networks to find vulnerable Citrix devices. Some other interesting vulnerability scanning modules are server version vulnerability, which is basically the leakage of the server banner, and also SSL certificate expired vuln, which helped us to find a lot of expired certificates in our corporate network, which I think is quite cool. And also a few other interesting ones like Heartbleed, Course, and a few vulnerabilities around FTP, ProFTPD and BFTPD. We currently have 8 brute forcing modules in NetTacker. We have FTP, HTTP, basic form, and then TLM, SMTP brute forcing, SSH brute forcing, Telnet, and WordPress XML RPC brute. So originally, NetTacker's name was IoT Scan, because the idea was that you use this tool to scan your network for IoT devices. Then you scan your Internet of Things devices for any open ports, and you can try to do a brute force and, for example, find default credentials. For example, how many devices you have which have admin as their credentials. So the main module of NetTacker is NetTacker port scan. Those of you familiar with Nmap know how complex it can be to learn this tool. And obviously NetTacker decided to simplify the process of port scanning. It's quite simple and it's quite fast because it's using Python multi-threading, and you can basically add threads by adding command line switches such as -t and -m to scan ports much faster. There's also a parameter called -g, which allows you to list specific ports to scan. For example, if you only want to scan your network for any devices which have ports 80 and 443, you just add -g 443. So how do you run NetTucker? NetTucker, if you run it with no command line switches, it will just dump its usage and will stop. So to run NetTucker, you need to provide it with at least two command line arguments, which is -i for the target and -m for the module. Which module would you like to use on the target? So here's the example. If you would like to perform a port scan on IP address 192.168.0.149, this is the command that you will run. You just define the IP address and define the module. You can also scan the entire network. If you can just use CIDR location, and if you have -24, NetTucker will scan 255 IP addresses, your entire Class C network, for any open ports. This is not all, because NetTucker targets can be not just a single IP, not just a network, but it can also be an IP range, and you can define a beginning and the ending IP address. But what is also great, you can define a whole domain, for example, OWASP.org, or you can define a specific URLs, for example, http://OWASP.org or https://OWASP.org. So make sure you do specify the protocol in the target. You can also, this is not all, right? So it's not just one IP address, it's not just the network. You can also define the whole list of targets, which is also great, in which case you will use -l parameter instead of -i. And in when you use -l, you need to create a text file, which is a list of all your targets. And NetTucker, rather than reading the targets from the command line, will read it from the file. And again, you can obviously define the module, and you will specify which particular module you would like to use. But what is also great about NetTucker is that you don't just pull one tool out of your OWASP, out of your Swiss Army knife to use. OWASP NetTucker actually actually allows you to chain your modules, and you can have multiple modules run on the target. So if you would like to use both port scan on this particular target and PHP-MyAdmin scan on the same target, what you need to do, you just define them both in your command line with a comma. And that's how easy it is. You can also use, for example, subdomain scan with OWASP.org. And then if you add server version vuln, that means that NetTucker will find all the subdomains of OWASP.org domain, and it will also try to extract all the server banners from it, which I think is absolutely great. And I will try to live demo to it a little bit later. Another great thing about NetTucker that it has profiles, which means that you can bundle modules together. We currently have several profiles, such as info, which is all information gathering modules used together, scan, all the scanning modules, brute, all the brute forcing modules, vuln, all the vulnerability scanning modules, WP for WordPress, Joomla for Joomla, or you can just use all profile, which means you basically try to use everything, or every single tool you pull out from your Swiss Army knife, and you use it. You don't have to remember all these modules. Of course, I understand it's quite difficult to remember all of them. That is why NetTucker also has a wizard mode, and all you have to remember is just add -w as a wizard, and NetTucker will guide you and will ask you lots of questions, like please enter the targets, please enter how many threads you would like to use, where would you like to save the results, etc. and etc. So I think I'm going to try to do a live demo, which is usually not a good idea because live demos fail a lot of times. But I think it's quite good to demonstrate you the tool as it is. So let me try to switch to Kali Linux. This is my Kali Linux VM. All right. Okay. I hope you can all see my screen. Right. So if you run NetHacker, I already have it installed, but it only takes a few minutes to install. Here's how you run NetHacker with no arguments. You just do Python NetHacker PY, and as I said, it just comes back with lots of information about how to use it. And yeah, without the documentation, it might be quite difficult for you to understand how to use it. But here is what I'm going to try to do. I'm going to add an OWASP.org, and I'm going to try to do a port scan on it. And yeah, because again, a reminder of responsible use, because we're allowed to scan OWASP. Please never use this tool for things that you're not allowed to scan. Always ask permission if you're scanning somebody else's network. And as you can see straight away, NetHacker detected that we have port 80 and port 443. Yeah, as you can see, this is how it works. What it's now doing is now also generating a report as well. And one of the great things about NetHacker that it can provide you reports in various formats as well, in text, in HTML, in JSON, and in CSV. We'll talk about this a bit later, and I'll also try to show you this in a second, because I'm going to try to run NetHacker with another with another command. Here is the text report that you can see in the command line. As you can see, NetHacker also stored the its result in an HTML file. So here's another cool thing that I'm going to show you is now I'm going to do a try to do a subdomain scan. Of OWASP.org. Notice what this is going to do. OWASP is now going to OWASP NetHacker is going to try to find all the subdomains of OWASP.org, and as you can see, there you go. These are all the subdomains that we currently have, and you'll say, okay, that's already interesting. So we can use it to find all the subdomains. But I'm going to now chain it with a server version vulnerability scan, and we will see how many of OWASP subdomains actually do have server banner vulnerability on them. So this is going to take a little bit longer, but you can see what NetHacker is doing. It's now listing all the subdomains like before, but now it's actually trying to connect to them. And as you can see, it's already coming up with the server version disclosure vulnerability. You can see all the server banners returned. Obviously, this is going to take some time, but obviously this process can also be speeded up by using multiple threads and multiple threads per individual host. And so this is what absolutely fantastic. Once a NetHacker finishes, you can view the report, and you can view the report generated in HTML by default. If you don't specify a report type, the default one is always HTML, but you can also define CSV and JSON, which I think is absolutely fantastic, because you can really use this tool for automation. And I'm going to show you in a second what the report looks like. One of the great advantages of NetHacker that it also uses a graph plugin. So it also draws a graph inside the HTML file. There you go. This is now finished. And you can see now it says that report is saved in this file and in the database. So I'm going to try to open this file here. Let's see. And you will be able to see the results. Okay, there goes. This is the graph I was talking about. And you can see how the attack started. Then you can see all the subdomains, and you can see that on each subdomain, a server version vulnerability module was used, and you can see all the port numbers as well on each of the subdomains. So this is absolutely fantastic for an open source tool. And then Nettacker will also show you a table with all these findings, and you can see in the results basically what host was scanned. If we were using any brute forcing modules, it will also show us any usernames and passwords which were found to be open on that particular host during brute forcing. It also shows you the port, the type of the module that was used, the description. In this case, it shows us the description of the server banner and the time when it was scanned. There's a bit of a visual effect. So as you hover your mouse over, you will be able to see just that particular line highlighted. But this is not all. One of the great things that I like about Nettacker, and I think you'll find this feature very, very useful, is the ability to generate reports in JSON and HTML files. So if I run exactly the same command now, but I'm going to add -o for output, and I will provide report.csv. So the same scan will be performed, but the difference will be that instead of writing the report into an HTML file, Nettacker will write it into a CSV file. And obviously that's quite useful because we can just open it in Excel and we can do filtering. We can then use it much, much easier to find the information that we need. Again, I would like to also let you know that OWASP Nettacker is using also a database. So every single scan that you run is actually stored in an internal SQLite database. And you can also use external database like MySQL if you want to use it in your enterprise, and so you want to store all the scan results to be able to search them later on. So you can see this is the scan is continuing, and we can see that the findings. So you can see some of the OWASP domains that use Cloudflare here. There's a Atlassian proxy. Once all the subdomains are listed, so basically what Nettacker does is now goes through every single subdomain, tries to connect to port 80, tries to connect to port 443, and tries to extract the server version. There you go. So you can see it's generated text, but you can see now it says report is saved in report.csv. So now let's see if we can look at that file. I'm going to try to open my LibreOffice to look at this file. Okay, and it's going to import the CSV. And there you go. We have a spreadsheet with all the results of our scans. I can ignore the scan ID column because it's only there for the database purposes. However, you can see all the results are here. And of course, the great advantage of having it as a spreadsheet that you can actually filter this data. And if I were to, for example, just use standard filtering facility inside my spreadsheet program, and I want to see all the domains which are protected by Cloudflare, I can just easily filter. Same way, if I only want to see any domains which still have port 80 open, I can also do it very easily. Okay, so that's for the live demo. Now I'm going to try to switch back to the presentation to talk about some other features. So again, I've demonstrated to you that Nettacker has graphs. There are 3 different types of graphs that you can use. It's the D3 tree, V1, V2, and a circle graph. We talked about Nettacker generating reports in JSON, which means they're consumable by other processes or CSV. It also has an API, and that API also has a web user interface. To start an API, you can just use a -- start API command line switch, and what will happen, OWASP Nettacker will start in this mode where it will show you the API key. It automatically generates a random API key, and it will run by default on port 5000. Once you connect to port 5000, you will see the web interface of Nettacker, which looks like this. And you can't do really anything there until you paste your API key. But once you are inside, you will be able to run scans. As you can see, we have a bit of a color coding. So you can see that all the vulnerability scanning modules, they all red. All the brute forcing modules are amber, and all the normal information gathering scan modules, they're all color-coded in green. Maltego transforms is another fantastic feature of NetHacker. So here's a screenshot of how you can use Maltego with OWASP NetHacker to generate the graph inside Maltego. And that's more or less the same scan that I showed you on the command line. So Citrix vulnerability is a great example how we managed to add this module back in January. And as you can see, OWASP NetHacker was able to scan and find vulnerable Citrix devices, helping organizations to patch. So if you would like to use NetHacker to find this vulnerability in your network, all you need to do is just specify the IP ranges of your network, which you would like to scan, and the module name is Citrix CVE 2019-19781 vuln. I'm not going to do a Citrix-like demo because I think I'm out of time. So very briefly about this interesting tweet from Jeremiah Grossman, where he said, I suggest that OWASP Top 10 2017 includes A0 asset inventory, because these days the biggest AppSec risk are websites that you don't know that you own. So NetHacker actually solves this problem because you can use it for asset discovery. You can discover your subdomains, your web service, your applications. You can scan your network for open ports, for new hosts. You can scan your network for default credentials. So how many websites or devices you have with admin, or any other default credentials. The great advantage of NetHacker that you can use one command to scan the entire network and discover all of these devices. You can also monitor any new subdomains and any new open ports on them. You can also monitor expired SSL certificates in your IP ranges. And another example of NetHacker use is you can find subdomains hosting vulnerable versions of WordPress, Drupal, and Joomla. So we are looking for contributors. If you'd like to help us, we have a developers section in OWASP NetHacker wiki. So can you please read it, because we have contributor guidelines before contributing. Also, I haven't noticed this little sign here, a little radar circle, as actually OWASP NetHacker logo. So we do have a logo, and if you see this, you will know that this is OWASP NetHacker tool. The tool is very young, as I mentioned, but it's already has some really awesome features, and we would like to see more and more people starting to use it in their enterprise networks, in their penetration testing engagements, in their bug bounty work, and we hope it's going to be useful for everyone. And if you would like to help us out, please do join OWASP NetHacker on GitHub, join our project, and submit new pull requests. So thank you very much. And if you'd like to contact me and ask any questions, my email address is sam.stepanian@owasp.org. You can also find me on Twitter at SecureStep9, and OWASP London chapter is OWASP London on Twitter. I think this is it for me. I'm not sure if we have any questions. Grant, are there any questions on YouTube chat?
Hi, Sam. No, it looks like, well, hang on, I've just got two new ones. There's a couple of hellos and some people coming through saying they're keen to catch up in person again. There was a bit of static on the stream, but okay. I suspect it was probably a microphone issue. Hopefully we've managed to get rid of it now. That's it.
Okay, well, I'd like to thank everyone, and I'd like to introduce Grant Ongus as the last presenter in this great marathon of OWASP chapters all day. And Grant is going to talk about gamifying threat modeling. So it's all yours now, Grant. Thank you very much, and hope to see you soon.
Thanks. Thanks, Sam. Right. So threat modeling. Let's start with a little bit about who I am. My name is Grant Ongus. I am heavily involved in the community, as you can see there. OWASP Global Board of Directors. Been involved with DEF CON as a goon for about a decade now. On staff with Black Hat, both USA and EU. If you take three things away from this slide, it should be how to get hold of me, grant@securedelivery.io or grantongers@owasp.org, or reach out to me on Twitter or GitHub @rootdemon. The other thing you can take away from this is that I've done a lot of things, as is evidenced by the nice grayness in the beard, seen stuff. I've done 10 years in dev, mainly working in environments that are regulated. 20 years in ops, and I've been playing with security for about 30 years. Most of that has been above board. I don't believe that there's such a thing as DevSecOps, and this is something that you'll often hear me say. There is DevOps done right. A little bit about OWASP. I'm not going to go into too much detail because you know who we are. You know what we're involved with. 150 projects, which cover everything from tools to documentation to plain code. Various stages of maturity, from flagship through to incubator. So stuff that's cutting edge, that's used by industry as a standard, like the OWASP Top 10, right the way through to things that are brand new, just up and coming, just starting. And those are the projects that are becoming the future. Over 280 chapters worldwide. We've had a fair number of them present today over the course of the last 24 hours, and I really want to thank them for that. I work for a company called Secure Delivery, and we basically do three things: assess, advise, and advance. Assess is metrics-based, measurement-based work using OWASP standards like the ASVS and SAM. Advise, which is helping both management understand the security and the delivery part of things, and helping security to understand what delivery wants to do, and helping delivery understand what security needs to do. And then advance, which is primarily training and helping both those groups, security and delivery teams, to move forward in better application security. So threat modeling. I'm talking about the gamification of threat modeling, which is about making threat modeling part of normal development planning. So threat modeling, we'll start off with what it is, why we do it, what its value is. We'll move on to a little bit about agile development, what exactly that is, and why there's a conflict between planning and actual agile dev. Some options to make threat modeling at agile pace work, and we'll talk about cornucopia there, and then what the next steps are. So threat modeling, the point of threat modeling is essentially to understand the application that's being modeled, to understand what it is that we're trying to achieve with that application, to get an idea of what the threats are that could potentially attack that application, and to understand who the actors are. So the threat actors, people who could act upon those threats. So how do we generally do threat modeling? Most threat modeling approaches will use something like Stride, and I'm going to use Stride. There are other examples here, but I'm using Stride just to make it easier for me to talk to. Stride is spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. And if you've ever watched an Adam Shoshak presentation, you'll see that he does that much quicker than I do, because he's so much more used to saying it. Spoofing is pretending to be something that you aren't, and the way that we counteract spoofing is by authenticating something. So spoofing is pretending to be something you're not. Authentication is proving who you are. Tampering is actually an attack on the integrity of something. And we talk about the CIA triad and how it has this very core concept of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And integrity is such an integral part of how we ensure that the data that we're using, that's being passed from one point to the other, is valid. That tampering with that is a huge breakdown, a huge threat to the whole data flow. Repudiation. Now, there's a question as to whether this is a threat or design feature. Repudiation and non-repudiation is simply being able to prove who performed what actions. So some systems have got non-repudiation built in. We have to know who did what. A great example of that is Git. We need to know who pushed that commit so we can do git blame later. As devs, you know what that is. But non-repudiation, so repudiation is sometimes a feature of systems where we need to hide who did what, where you can publish something and have complete anonymity in doing that. So although this is a threat, not being able to know who did what, and the balance of that is being able to log who has done what and when and where, some systems, it's a feature. Information disclosure, I talked about the CIA. This is the confidentiality part of that. So ensuring that information cannot be disclosed is how we ensure that that information disclosure and confidentiality is ensured. Denial of service, which is what most people think of when they think of hacks on systems. If it's not information disclosure, as in the stealing of financial data, for example, then it's stopping someone from being able to do something. DDoSing a website, great example. This is the other corner of that triad, availability. So availability is ensuring that we always have uptime. And it's a balance between confidentiality and availability is essentially the conflict that's in security. The most secure systems, confidential systems, are ones that nobody can access, meaning that they are not available at all. So we need to balance the two. Elevation of privilege is the last part of STRIDE, and that's being able to do more than you should be able to in case of access control. So authorization. So we talked about spoofing being authentication. Spoofing is knowing who you are, or authentication is knowing who did the thing. Authorization is about, do you have the rights to do the thing? So how does development actually happen? So let's start with what Agile Dev is not. It's not waterfall. And waterfall is this very linear approach to things. You start by gathering requirements, you move on to getting your design sorted out, then you actually do all the work of the development stuff, then you test it quickly if you have time, and then you deploy it out to production. And usually in this process, you spend a lot of time thinking about threats in phase 2. So phase 2 is where we're thinking about how we're going to put the system together and what it's going to look like. Waterfall is the development methodology that preceded everything that is Agile, including things like DevOps. And it's still practiced wherever Agile cannot be. So there are still industries that need to make use of waterfall approach to development. And I think of people who are developing for hardware. It's incredibly difficult to iterate hardware versions. So what is Agile? Well, basically Agile is we do waterfall really, really quickly, and we do it in succession to each other. So we make sure that we get requirements design dev, test, and then get it out as quickly as possible, preferably in a period of hours, minutes, although usually it's days or weeks. So step 1 is gathering requirements, the MVP, but just enough of the requirements to make a difference to our customers today. Step 2 and 3 is design and build, which tend to work hand in hand. So we design as we build, and that's a decent approach to doing things, as long as we ensure that what we're building fits into a bigger design in some way. Step 4 is comprehensively testing the solution. That is it functions as we designed it to, and then somehow we throw in some security there as well. Step 5 is deploying that build to a client for fun and hopefully for profit. And then we keep doing that over and over and over again. And every time we come through this loop, we are coming back with new requirements from a functional point of view. So threat modeling and Agile. So threat modeling is all about time. It's about when we do the threat modeling, how much threat modeling we do, and how often we need to do it. So at design time, when we understand use cases, but before we start building, that's ideally where we need to be doing threat modeling. It's a special point in time that you can design for security. Unfortunately, it takes time to do. So we end up spending some time on this. And we need to make sure that we balance how much time we spend on it with the value that we get out of it. The larger the piece of design work you do, the more time that you need to spend on it. So if we break that design work up into smaller pieces, we can spend less time on each piece. And as we start to build, that's when we realize that more threat modeling needs to be done. As we go through that cycle again, we start building, we realize we're adding new components that we need. Now we need to worry about the threats those components potentially introduce. So the problems with that is that we end up modeling too late. So threat modeling is generally done by security folk rather than by development teams. And generally security folk are invited to look at the designs before building happens, but long after the design is already complete, which in an agile world means that they've probably already started building some of the components to get to a point where they have a finalized design. So that's a problem. The other problem is that we end up with a large threat count. So I see my slides have got a problem on here, but I'll fix it later. So when you end up with too many threats to deal with, it becomes, how do you see the wood for the trees? How do you know what things are most important? The third problem you end up with is inaccurate models. We had a design that we had right in the beginning. We approved it. We went through the threats with it. We are happy with the remediation we're going to put in place for those threats as security folk. And then developers take it away and they start building it. But because they're building agilely, they're going to make changes to that design as they build. And because they're making those changes, things will come up. So I got a couple of quotes for you. Threat modeling, the sooner the better, but never too late. And this is actually Stephen and Avi, who are responsible for the OWASP threat modeling project. And this kind of sums up how do we deal with the problems of designing too late. Threat modeling needs to happen as soon as we possibly can, but never later than we have to. The next quote for you is, you probably want to find too many threats rather than too few, by Adam Shostak. I'm going to disagree with Adam here because too many threats tends to lead to analysis paralysis, where we don't know what to do next, we don't know how to deal with it, or we spend too much time getting this large number of threats that either development has moved on and has moved past us, or worse, they haven't, and they're waiting for us, and we've now held up a release. And more importantly, we've held up the ability of the business to agilely respond to customers' needs. All models are wrong, some models are useful, by George Box. So this is the concept around having threat modeling that doesn't work because it's the wrong thing, or we're building something or building around threats that potentially can be useful but aren't. It's better to have some level of threat modeling than none at all. And that's essentially what the second half of George Box's quote is about. Is the model good enough for this particular application? So we need to start with something that's reasonably okay. To that end, I introduce to you OWASP Cornucopia. Now, there are a bunch of different methodologies for doing gamification. I briefly talked about Adam Shostak earlier. He designed something called the Elevation of Privilege, which is another OWASP project that also does threat modeling, and it also gamifies threat modeling. It does come back onto the STRIDE methodologies in many ways. I find Cornucopia to be an incredibly useful, quick way of doing threat modeling with developers, however, because the game combines a bunch of excellent projects. It combines the ASVS, which is the Application Security Verification Standard. It combines the SCP, which is the Secure Coding Practices. It combines OWASP App Center, and then SafeCode and CAPIC as well. So where do you start? So you start with some diagrams describing the functionality of the application, how data flows through the system that provides us with a great deal of insight as to where an attacker might potentially modify data, and some architectural designs. So to understand what the pieces of the puzzle are. So data flow diagrams and architectural diagrams are great things to have. Now, if we're doing this very agilely, we possibly don't have those things, in which case, hopefully we'll generate just enough of a data flow diagram and just enough of an architectural design that is useful for the purpose of the modeling we're going to be doing. But more importantly, we need to have access to the people who are actually going to be building the features and the people who understand what those features need to do, because those individuals will understand how things fit together. Now, the game itself is essentially a box of cards, much like this one. And I have like maybe 19 different versions that I've gathered over the years. And those cards, essentially, the cards contain a number of different suits of suits of cards. The first three: authentication, authorization, and session management. Authentication is verifying who you are. We talked about that when we talked about Stride. Authorization is making sure that you are able to do or allowed to do the things that you're permitted to do. So that covers the realm of privilege escalation that we talked about earlier. Session management, which is how frequently do we check these two things? And you want to make sure that the session is still good, that the session doesn't run too long. We don't have to authenticate every single time. We don't have to check for authorization every single time. And those are playoffs that we can have to balance. And that's essentially what we do with session management. The other three cards are data validation and encoding, which is all about basic hygiene when it comes to ensuring that the inputs, that anything that you receive into the application are cleared properly. Cryptography, which is encryption, whether it's in transit or at rest. The right amount of encryption is important. We've had a couple of talks today that talk about how crypto should be boring, and yeah, I totally agree with that. Then the last suite of cards is the OWASP Cornucopia itself, which is kind of a trump suite that contains general security issues that you might see. So the game itself, it's a 9-step process. Pre-sort the deck, as in strip out the cards that are most useful to whatever it is you're going to be discussing. Deal the cards out to all the players, and all the players are as many devs as you can get into the room, but you especially want to have people who are doing some level of architectural design, so lead devs or principal devs, and people who are doing some testing, QA people. You want to have them in the room, and you also want to have usually the Scrum Master, because he acts as the game runner. And definitely you want to have the product owner, or you want to engage the product owner afterwards, because they're going to have to do something with what comes out of here. Describe the threat that you're talking about to the player. So as you play the cards, you put down the first card. You determine that this is how this is going to work. This attack is going to work in this way. Describe the attack, how it would possibly affect the system you're looking at. Convince the other people around the table that it is something that can work. And if you convince them, you score points for it. And you score 1 point for a valid attack and 1 point for the highest card played in the lead suit for that round. The next person in the line follows suit. So they play the next card that they have that matches the suit of the card previously. At the end of the game, when you've played all the rounds you want to play, or when you've played all the cards, you need to award the winner, because there's a winner and they need to get a prize of some kind. And that prize can be anything from, a £500 gift voucher on Amazon, if you're feeling incredibly generous, or literally just a little badge that they wear to show that they're a security champion for the sprint, or something between those two. But most importantly, we need to follow up. Each valid item should be noted. And the noting of those valid items is essentially one of the biggest outputs, and that is that we need to have some stories. So these user stories, each of the findings are going to be a user story. They're going to Jira, going to a backlog, and then we'll take it further. It covers both security and compliance, because user stories will lead to code that needs to be written or actions that need to be taken, which will ensure that things actually get more secure. And doing threat modeling is often a requirement, and it'll help them to do those requirements. So where does it fit into application security as a whole? It fits in at the modeling stage, and that's the most important part of that. There is more to this presentation that I would normally be giving, and I will give at the next meetup for the OWASP chapter. And mainly what it go into is how this actually works in a particular organization. And I plan at the next OWASP London chapter meetup, and possibly the next OWASP Suffolk chapter meetup, to present together with a customer that I've done this work with, so they can tell you how well it worked. And they've also got something that they'd like to share with the community at that point. And that is me. Again, Root Demon, if you want to get hold of me, REWTD on Twitter, on GitHub, or my email addresses. Thank you very much. I see that I managed to lose Sam somehow. Not sure exactly where he disappeared to, but this does bring us close to the end of the time, the 24 hours that we've been running the chapters all day. I don't see any questions in the chat, but if anybody does have any questions, please reach out to me. You can find me either on Twitter or by dropping me an email at my email addresses that I showed at the beginning. And also you can follow up on the OWASP Slack channel if you're keen to do that. You'll often find me on OWASP Slack, so it's also at Root Demon there. And thank you very much. If nobody has any more questions, then I will end the stream. Thanks, folks. And very last shout out to OWASP Cape Town. I hope some of you guys are actually watching today. And up next, please don't forget there is a closing session. So there's hour 25 closing and thanks will be happening in the last stream. So please join us there. Thank you.